All right, last podcast for bacteria. Bacteria, we know the real classification scheme is way more complicated than this, okay? Way more complicated. But there are two domains of bacteria. One is the archaea and one is the eubacteria. We're going to kind of talk about them in a kind of not particularly accurate way, but it's an easy way for us to talk about them as two kingdoms, two domains, however you want to look at it. And we're going to talk about first the Archaebacteria. This is domain Archaea, okay? There we go. And it is the most ancient group and is the group that probably gave rise to both the true bacteria, the eubacteria, and us, the eukaryotic domain, okay, the more complex cells. Archaebacteria are also called extremophiles because they live in extreme habitats. Some of them live in oxygen-free places. Some of them live in highly concentrated salt water like the Great Salt Lake or the Dead Sea. And some live in really hot, acidic places like sulfur springs. So really unusual extreme environments is where you'd run into these guys. It is thought, I mean, it makes kind of sense if you look at this one in particular, the oxygen-free. It is thought that these were probably the ancestor to all life would probably be in this group because they can survive well, some of them in oxygen-free environments. It's just that we don't have very many oxygen-free environments on Earth anymore. All right. The eubacteria is the other group, the other domain / kingdom that we're going to talk about. This is the bacteria that we commonly interact with today. They live everywhere, lots of habitats, and lots of different ways of living, lots of lifestyles, meaning some are heterotrophic, some are autotrophic. It's all kinds of stuff, crazy stuff that goes on with all the bacteria. They're everywhere, okay? So let's talk about some of these bacteria. Some bacteria are indeed heterotrophic. They eat stuff. They don't open their little mouths and eat it because they don't have mouths, but they do absorb organic compounds and then convert those compounds like sugars and things to energy. They are found everywhere. These are the kinds we do have to worry about that might make us sick. Most of them don't affect us at all, but some can be parasites and cause disease. But most of them are not only harmless, but are actually quite beneficial to life on Earth. They are saprobes. That is it's just another word for a decomposer. Okay, they're decomposers. So that means they're really important in the carbon cycle. They will break things down and return carbon atoms into the earth after they've been locked up in a living thing. So they return organic compounds to the soil as they do their decomposition of waste, whatever. Okay, so really super important. There's also autotrophic bacteria, bacteria that basically makes its own food. Some are photosynthetic autotrophs. For example, cyanobacteria is a green bacteria because it does have chlorophyll in it. It used to be called blue-green algae, but that's not correct. They're bacteria. So now we call them the blue-green bacteria. There are also chemosynthetic autotrophs, meaning autotrophs that make their own food, but they use chemicals from the environment. So they convert inorganic compounds to energy, like some bacteria that are really super important in the nitrogen cycle, if you remember that from ecology. Some bacteria are really the nitrogen-fixing bacteria, if you remember those. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria are super important for ecological cycles on the planet, and we wouldn't have the nitrogen cycle without them, okay? Oxygen use in bacteria, it depends on the bacteria. Some organisms have to have oxygen. Most of them today with our oxygen-rich atmosphere are called obligate aerobes, meaning aerobic means using oxygen. If you do aerobic exercise, you have to use a lot of oxygen. Obligate means you're obligated to do that. So they have to have oxygen to live. I'm going to skip down here. Obligate anaerobes, well, and means without. So this means these guys are obligated to, can't be near oxygen, it'll actually kill them, kind of like those first bacteria. And there's a few of those, not tons of them, that can't live in the presence of oxygen, but syphilis, a famous STD, is one of them. And then there's those that can go either way. These are called facultative anaerobes, and they don't really care. They can do either one. Okay. Bacteria are hugely important. They are hugely important in what we already mentioned, nitrogen fixation and keeping nitrogen going through the various ecological cycles. Also the carbon cycle, and so on. They're really important in food. Yogurt and other things that you might eat wouldn't be made without bacteria. We've already talked about antibiotics. They're incredibly important. Bacteria are incredibly important in fighting, but they also help us make certain medicines. They help us make insulin by genetically altering the bacteria. We can actually use them to make medicine. They are important in engaging in symbiotic relationships with us. For example, the bacteria that live in your gut, your intestines, E. coli, help process nutrients for you couldn't digest without them. Some bacteria in your gut make vitamin K for you. The only source of vitamin K you have is these bacteria in your digestive tract. And of course, bacteria do cause disease. Most of them don't, but those few that do are a huge, huge problem. Okay? So let's talk about disease a little bit. Bacteria themselves sometimes do make you sick as they go after your own cells. But more often than not, what actually makes you sick is the waste products that the bacteria produce while they're trying to live among your cells. They make these toxins. Now, it's important to remember that only a few bacteria actually cause disease, but of all diseases, about half of them are caused by bacteria. So while there's only a small portion of bacteria that are making us sick, that small portion of bacteria is making a whole lot of us really sick. The most problem we have with bacteria is in places where there is poor medical care, no antibiotics, things like that, poor hygiene, where people don't have clean water to bathe in or drink, or poor medical hygiene is used, or whatever. Cholera is a huge bacterial disease. Bubonic plague, the Black Plague, was a bacterial disease. So those can be huge problems. Another famous bacterial disease that can be pretty devastating if you get it, and is also a problem even in this country, is called Lyme disease. We think of Lyme disease and associate it with ticks like this one, but Lyme disease actually is caused by bacteria that you get from a tick biting you. The classic way you recognize Lyme disease is with this bullseye type wound pattern that appears around the teeny tiny tick bite. Unfortunately, you don't always get that, so some people get infected with Lyme disease and don't even know they've been infected. It can be a pretty debilitating illness. If you get antibiotics right away, then it's very easy to treat, but if it gets established, it's really pretty devastating illness. Now, there are adaptations that bacteria have made to try to survive in this really harsh world we live in. One of those adaptations is something called an endospore. If a bacteria senses harsh environmental conditions, extreme temperature, extreme chemistry in the environment, whatever, it can secrete a really hard covering around itself. And that's what's in this picture. Let me try to get a different color of pen here. There we go. Okay, so right here is the actual bacterium. And all of this other stuff, all these other layers all around it, that is the endospore. It has secreted this really hard covering that can basically survive anything for hundreds of years. It can survive boiling, which is why when people can things, like they're canning and they put away tomatoes from their garden or whatever to survive, to last in their pantry for over the winter. You can't just boil the potatoes and then put them in a jar and stick them away. You have to put cook things in a pressure cooker so that you can get the temperature even higher than just boiling, because that's the only thing that will kill these endospores. Botulism is the disease you get that can be devastating if you eat unprepared, if you eat food that has not been prepared properly and the botulism bacteria has been allowed to grow. It can be deadly. Another disease that is not a foodborne illness typically, but tetanus, if you get an injury, if you step on, so it's always associated with a rusty nail or something like that. But in fact, the rust really has little to do with it, other than that the little grooves and nooks and crannies in the rust are good places for bacteria to grow. If you get a deep wound, a puncture wound, tetanus is one of those bacteria that don't do well in the presence of oxygen. So a deep wound is the perfect place for a tetanus bacterium to grow. And so that's why deep wounds require tetanus shots. Tetanus used to be called, or has always been colloquially called lockjaw, because the symptoms are paralysis, and one of the first things to get paralyzed is the jaw, and eventually ending in a horrific seizure, which is depicted in this painting as looking this way. Tetanus, that rigid arching of the back, is a classic kind of final symptom of tetanus. So yeah, so that's that. That's your little tour of bacteria. You are now done with viruses and bacteria, and we are now going to get on to some of the more entertaining organisms that we can deal with. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Take care.